Moving to this, over the next weekend, Ghana celebrated its 64th Independence Day, from colonial rule, a day which typically would be widely celebrated given how far the country has come since then. For a silent minority of Ghanaians, though, the day passed quietly and painfully, as they are still reeling from what they call a violent erasure by the homophobic state bent on harming and persecuting them. Joining us now to discuss the LGBTI+ community in that country is rights activist and director at the Rights Ghana, that's Alex Kofi Donko. Mr. Donko, a pleasure to have you on the program. Now, on the surface, Ghana as a nation has developed vastly since its independence back in 1957. But why would you say the country continues to hold on to a historically ingrained homophobia?
The issue of homophobia started from when the colonial laws were introduced to Ghana, and in this case you're talking about the British colonial law, which is the section 104 of our criminal code that was adopted after independence. And this law is one that a lot of times politicians use as the basis to which they antagonize the community. Apart from that, there is also the high level of homophobia coming from religious groups and religious leaders. A lot of times they base their homophobia from their religious teachings and then also their moral code of what is good and what is not good.
So given what you're saying, it is unsurprising that many queer Ghanaians do not see Independence Day worth celebrating.
Well, as queer Ghanaians, we indeed see that our independence is one that is not aligned with all other Ghanaians, right? Because the LGBT community continuously face a certain level of persecution. And one has to do with the recent reading of our community space, one that was established to provide help, support, and need to the already marginalized group in Ghana. And this place was raided by both the landlord and the police officers and the media and some traditional leaders. And so obviously when it comes to independence and also our emblem of being freedom and justice, this freedom and this justice are not accorded to LGBTQ persons in Ghana.
So for some of us who may not know the situation that's playing out in Ghana, just talk us through how the country continues to suppress the LGBTI+ community.
Yes, so this suppression comes as a result of mostly rhetorics from religious leaders. I will quickly say that Ghana is a country that is a predominantly religious people. And so a lot of the homophobia is coming mostly from the religious leaders. And then also coupled with political rhetorics that also antagonize the community. And then also the idea of being queer or being an LGBT person is in our culture or being our tradition, which is not true. The fact is that as Africans, we have always believed in diversity and inclusion and intolerance. So a lot of these religious people are basing their intolerance on the fact that it is not our culture. But indeed, if you look at it closely, it is these religious practices that we are practicing that we have adopted, and it's being part of our culture. And if anything at all, we believe that culture is dynamic, culture is not static. And so the idea of basing our existence to whether it is our culture or not, that's one that is wrong and should be condemned, because human life should be as important and is important above any culture or any tradition or any religion.
I want us to shift gears a bit and start discussing the government's response to the plight of the LGBTI+ community. Now, early on this year, we saw a rights center being raided by authorities. And now this was on the order of President Akufo-Nana-Addo in the form of a televised spectacle which warned and reminded all queer Ghanaians of that they're second-class citizens and that the lack of a protected status in their own country. How would you say the government's stance on the matter has influenced this apparent discrimination against the community?
Yes, it is rather unfortunate because in 2018, Human Rights Watch came out with a report, a very detailed report about the abuses that LGBTQ persons go through, and it was titled "No Choice But to Deny Who I Am." And in that report, it was very detailed, the abuses that LGBTQ persons go through on daily basis in Ghana. When that report was launched, no government agency or department spoke about the report or made any comments to that effect. Also, the president had an opportunity to speak at a religious gathering. And in the gathering, what he mentioned was that not under his presidency is there going to be any marriage between same-sex couples. And we find it very disingenuous, especially considering the fact that the conversation that is on board is about the human right, the abuses that LGBTQ persons go through. So how do you overlook the abuses that we are talking about to talk about marriage? How do you expect a queer person to marry when his very life or very existence is being threatened? And as a matter of fact, some are even being abused on a daily basis as a result of they being existent or their existence as a queer person. So that is unfortunate, and that is one that we have heard from the government, which we think it is not the right statement to have made, especially considering that we are all Ghanaians and we own equal rights as Ghanaians.
I also want to discuss what the law dictates right now. I mean, just talk us through Ghanaians' society's reliance on this Section 104 of the country's penal code. Now, this colonial era law has been used to justify this continuous and mounting attack on queer citizens.
Yes, this law, like you mentioned, is a colonial legacy law, right? That was adopted in 1960 by Ghanaians, and then that is a law that we've been working with as Ghanaians. But I believe that as a people and as an individual, this law is one that is also empowering some Ghanaians to violate and abuse other Ghanaians. So it is about time that we look at this law and then be able to repeal it. And we repealing it as Ghanaians isn't anything new, because if you look at some other African countries, they have realized that this law isn't helping any of their citizens, and if anything at all, it is rather influencing the abuses that some citizens go through. And so they've repealed it. And a typical example is Botswana, and an example is also Angola. These countries have all repealed the law. So I think Ghana is no different, and it's about time we look at that law and make sure we repeal it as a country and as a people.
Now, it would seem that such legislation would also infringe on Ghanaian citizens' access to the most basic human rights and freedoms. Just quickly talk us through that.
Yes, so when you go through the Ghanaian system of actually accessing basic needs like hospital services, like the police services, and all the other services that mostly the government offer, a lot of times you realize that there is high level of discrimination in those spaces. There are individuals who would go to the hospital to assess basic need, and just by their appearance alone or their mannerisms alone, give some of these doctors the leverage to discriminate against them by saying, oh, and how do you appear, the way you talk, the way you act, the way you react, it seems you are gay, or it seems you are an LGBTQ person, and so I might not offer help to you. In the same space, when you go to places like the police station to report issues of abuse, there is also that high level of discrimination from some police officers because of their notion or their perceived idea of what it means to be an LGBT person, and as a result, discriminate against people who go and access services from all of these places.
Well, that was Alex Kofi Donko. He's the director at the LGBTI Plus Rights Center in Ghana.